Mr. Marchetti, the card we have on file has been declined. Raphael Sandoval said it quietly, one hand resting on the back of the groom's chair. The way you tell a man his car is being towed. Grant made it loud. Run it again. There is nothing wrong with that card. The band had just finished. The lights had come down for the last dance. 280 people were holding champagne they had been told to hold. It moved through the room the way a hairline crack moves across drywall. The kind I get paid to find. The kind that means something behind the wall shifted a long time ago. $95,200, upgraded bar, additional florals, the guest room block, late night service, Sunday brunch, 2 extra hours of the ballroom. A woman near the cake set down her glass without drinking from it. Then my ex-husband turned around and looked at the last table in the room, table 38, beside the service door, and 280 people followed his eyes to me. Plain black dress, sparkling water I hadn't touched. Grant, our divorce was final 4 months ago. Did you honestly think I would keep paying your credit card? He crossed the floor. He put both hands flat on my table, on either side of my glass, and leaned down so that only the nearest tables could hear him. You are going to fix this, I said one word. No, Raphael had followed him. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on Grant, and his voice stayed exactly where it had been all evening. Sir, there are 2 ways forward tonight. A valid card, now, or a signed acknowledgement and a wire before noon on Monday, in which case the unpaid services will not be provided this evening. Those are the same thing. They aren't, sir. 10 o'clock is when the premium bar opens, when the kitchen releases the late-night service, and when the band goes into overtime. I have to authorize those before they happen. After 10, I can't unspend them. He said it without cruelty. That is the part people misunderstood afterward. Raphael Sandoval was not punishing anyone. He was reading a contract out loud to a man who had signed it and never once imagined being held to it. Delia reached us then, in the dress, $20,000 of ivory silk, and a stone on her hand that caught the chandelier light and threw it back across the tablecloth. 15 years of friendship, graduate school, her mother's funeral, the key to my house. Her first words to me in 11 months were not hello. Don't do this here. Do what, Delia? Don't, her voice dropped. Not in front of his parents, behind her. Someone at table 12 had already lifted a phone. I looked past both of them, at the room, 1,200 white roses, a 7-tier cake with a knife still resting against it. A champagne tower nobody was going to drink from now. I inspect buildings for a living, structural integrity, load paths. I walk through parking garages and school gymnasiums and hospital wings, and I find the places where something is about to fail. Usually years before anybody standing in the room can feel it. And this is the thing I have learned in 18 years of doing it. Failure never happens where people are looking. It happens where the load has been carried by one side for too long, quietly, without complaint, for years, and then on one ordinary Saturday, that side simply stops carrying it. Nothing dramatic occurs at the moment of failure. There is no sound. The weight just goes looking for somewhere else to rest, and it discovers that nowhere else was ever built to hold it. I have testified about it. I have written reports about it. I had never once applied the sentence to my own kitchen table. That is what 280 people were watching at 9:41 that night, though almost none of them had the words for it yet. If you have ever been the one who carries it, in your marriage, in your family, in a friendship that has lasted 15 years, leave one word in the comments for me, yours. I want to know how many of us are sitting here. Because Grant was not afraid of the word no. He was afraid because it was the first time in 12 years he had heard me say it without immediately offering him something else instead. We met 12 years earlier at an urban redevelopment conference in a hotel ballroom that smelled like carpet glue and burnt coffee. I was 30, with 4 employees and a company named after myself, because I could not think of anything braver. Grant Marchetti had 6 employees and a presentation about adaptive reuse that was better than his numbers were. I knew that within 20 minutes of meeting him, I want to be honest about that, because later people asked me how I could have missed it. And the answer is that I didn't miss it. I saw it on day 1. I simply decided it was a thing I could help with. That is not the same as being fooled. It is worse. In a way, being fooled happens to you. What happened to me, I volunteered for. We married 2 years later, and about 18 months after that, Marchetti Development Partners had its first serious cash flow problem, a draw that came in 6 weeks late on a project that had already hired its crew. So I called my bank and added my husband as an authorized user on my card. I want to be precise about this, because everything that happened in that ballroom 11 years later comes down to it. His name was printed on the card. He could spend on the card, but the account was mine, opened before the marriage, funded by my company, in my name alone. An authorized user is a passenger. The account belongs to whoever opened the door. Neither of us thought about it again for a decade. He carried it in his wallet beside his driver's license. I paid the statement every month the way you replace a furnace filter. In year 2, I built a spreadsheet, nothing elaborate, date, amount, project, and a 4th column I labeled expected repayment. It is the same tool I use on every job site. When you carry a cost for somebody else, you write it down, not because you distrust them, because unwritten obligations rot. Heinz saw it open on my laptop on a Sunday morning while I was making eggs. He wasn't angry. I have thought about that 1,000 times since. And I want to be fair to him. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse me. He did not slam a door. He just stood in the kitchen holding his coffee, looking at the screen. And after a while he said, "I didn't know I was being graded." Then he kissed the top of my head and went out to the garage. I kept the spreadsheet for 8 more months. I stopped updating it in March. I deleted the file in November, on a night when he was working late. And I remember feeling something almost like relief, as if I had finally put down a suitcase I'd been embarrassed to be seen carrying. My company designs financial controls for public projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I can find an unauthorized expenditure in 4 minutes. In my own house, I destroyed the only record I had in order to prove that I trusted my husband. Years later, a forensic accountant would ask me if I had kept any documentation. I said no. I had dismantled my own load-bearing wall and called it love. Here is the part I would want my daughter to understand. If I had one, help has an expiration date, and the date gets shorter every time. The first time I covered a payroll for him, year 1, he brought home flowers and told the story at dinner parties for 6 months. The 4th time, year 5, he thanked me by text. The 11th time, year 9. He asked why the transfer had taken 2 days. Nobody announces the moment when a gift becomes a utility bill. It just quietly changes categories, and you keep paying it, because stopping now would look like an accusation. Delia Brandt came into our life through me. I need to say that plainly, because for a long time afterward, I let people assume otherwise. And the assumption was gentler on me than the truth. She was my friend first. 15 years first. She sat 2 seats from me in a graduate seminar and made a joke about the professor's tie, and that was that. I brought her to our anniversary dinner. I recommended her to Grant for the lobby renovation. And at that dinner, halfway through the second bottle, she laughed and pointed her fork at the two of us and said, "Don't you two become best friends and drop me." It was a Thursday in October, and neither of them had any reason to lie about something so small. Grant said, "Springfield, a contractor walkthrough, dinner after, home late." Delia said, "Columbia, her sister's, a birthday thing, back Friday." I wasn't checking. That matters to me. Still, I have never once opened his phone. I did not follow anybody. On Friday morning, a project manager on my team turned her screen toward me to show me a permit revision, and her lock screen came up first. And it was a photograph of her own birthday from the night before, taken on a rooftop bar on Southwest Boulevard, 3 miles from my house. And behind her, out of focus, but not out of focus enough, at a table by the rail, were my husband and my best friend. I looked at it for perhaps 2 seconds. Then I said something about the permit revision, and she turned the screen back around, and the rest of the day happened normally, the way days do. Grant came home that night with a story. He told me about Springfield. He told me the steak was the worst steak in the state of Missouri, gray in the middle, and that the server had a lanyard with a keychain from a Branson show on it and kept apologizing for the kitchen. He was funny about it. He did an impression of the server. I laughed. That is the detail I could not get past afterward. Not that he lied, that he garnished it. A man protecting himself gives you less. A man who has stopped being afraid of you gives you a whole evening that never happened, with a lanyard in it. 3 weeks later, the messages came through on the tablet. We kept in the kitchen for recipes and site plans. It was signed into his account. It had been signed into his account for years. Once Sloane signs the Foundry Row guarantee, we can stop pretending, and under it, 11 minutes later, she'll sign. She always signs when you tell her the company needs her. I want you to understand what the Foundry Row guarantee was. It was $2,100,000, secured against my personal investment account, not my company's, mine. The account I had built 1 quarter at a time since I was 26. We had dinner that same night, because the reservation had been made 3 weeks earlier, and I could not think of a reason to cancel that I was ready to say out loud. Halfway through, he brought it up. He was gentle about it. He said the lender wanted the signature by Monday. And then he set down his fork and said, "I guess I thought my wife believed in me." For 10 years, I had believed he was asking me a question. That night, I finally heard it for what it actually was. A lever. He was not asking whether I believed in him. He was checking whether the lever still worked. He had pulled it maybe 40 times in a decade, and every single time it had returned the same result. And so he had stopped even bothering to make it sound new. I said I would look at the documents. Hun put them on my pillow before he went to bed. Not on the desk, on my pillow, squared to the edge of the case, with a pen laid diagonally across the top sheet. "Sign before breakfast," he said, and turned out the light, and was asleep in 9 minutes. I lay in the dark until almost 4 in the morning, and somewhere around 2, I stopped being a wife lying awake and became the other thing I am, the thing I have been for 18 years. I started walking the structure. That is the actual job, by the way. People think inspection is about finding the collapse. It isn't. Anyone can find a collapse. The job is finding the first crack, the one that came before all the others, the one that everything after it was simply a consequence of. So I lay there in my own bedroom and I went looking for it. Not the rooftop bar. That was recent. That was damage you could already see. I went back further. Year 9, Year 6, the 11th payroll, the 4th, the 1st, a Sunday morning in a kitchen, a laptop screen, a man holding coffee, and I found it. I had been looking in the wrong place for a decade because I had been standing inside the room I was trying to inspect. I did not sign before breakfast. I made coffee, said the lender's language needed a second read, and watched him accept that without concern, because a woman asking for 2 days was still a woman who was going to sign. At 9 that morning, I called an attorney. Yvette Okonkwo has an office above a dry cleaner in Westport and a way of listening that makes you slow down. I had prepared a summary, dates, amounts, the guarantee. I got about 90 seconds in before she raised one finger and asked me the only question she cared about first. "Are you safe?" I said yes. I had to think about it for a moment, and she watched me think about it, and neither of us said anything about the pause. Then she gave me 3 rules. Sign nothing, move no money impulsively, no clever transfers, no draining anything. Nothing a court could later describe as a maneuver, and tell him nothing until we knew what we were looking at. You are not building a case against him yet, she said. You are just turning the lights on. The man who turned them on was Terrence Boyd. Forensic accountant, 61 years old, mechanical pencil, spoke maybe 40 words an hour. He pulled 2 years of the joint Foundry Row account, $500,000 in it, $465,000 of which was mine, and he did not call me for 19 days. When he did, he had $309,000 in payments he described as unsupported. Most of it moved through a Delaware entity, formed 14 months earlier, whose sole member was Delia Brandt. Brandt and Company had invoiced $52,000 for something called tenant experience analysis on a building that had no tenants yet. And here is the part Terrence made sure I understood, because it is the hinge of everything. Our joint venture agreement required written approval from both members for any expenditure above $25,000. That threshold is standard. I wrote it into the agreement myself, which meant the $52,000 could not move without my signature. He laid the documents out on the conference table in a specific order, and he did not begin with the 2 forged ones. He began with 6 real ones. 6 documents I had genuinely signed. My hand, my pen, no question. A change order I signed while I was on a call with the city. A release I signed standing at the stove with a spatula in my other hand. 3. I signed in an airport. 1 I signed in the passenger seat of his truck at a red light on Broadway, using the dashboard. Terrence never said it out loud. He just put them in a row and waited. My 6 real signatures are what made the 2 forged ones believable. He did not forge the signature of a careful woman. He forged the signature of a woman who had learned to sign without reading, because he was the one who taught her. $309,000 did not make me cry. $118 did. It was an Italian place on Baltimore Avenue, October the 11th, my mother's birthday, the year before. Grant had a conflict, a lender dinner. He was sorry, he'd call her. Delia arrived 40 minutes late in the middle of the entrees, apologized to my mother with both hands around hers, and gave her a card she had clearly written in the car. I know the charge was theirs because it posted to the statement for the card ending in 4402. The account is mine. It always was. Every month for 11 years. I had been the one who opened the envelope. $309,000 is money. $118 is my mother's birthday. It meant they were spending my money to pay for lying to a calendar. I sat in Terrence's conference room and did the arithmetic I had been avoiding for a decade. In 4 years. I had asked my husband 7 questions about money. I counted them. 7, in 4 years, in a marriage. And not one of those 7 times did the answer come back as a number. Every single time, the answer came back as a question about my character. Did I trust him? Did I believe in him? Was I really going to make this a thing? I had been trained out of asking, and the training had worked so well that I had started congratulating myself for it. I confronted him on a Saturday morning in our kitchen. He asked 3 questions before he apologized. How did you get the records? Has Terrence contacted the bank? Have you spoken to Delia? 3 questions about exposure, none about me. Then he cried, and he was not faking it. And between the crying, he said that being married to me had felt like being audited by his own wife, that my competence had made him small. I have turned that over for a long time. Here is where I landed. He believed my capability had injured him, and that therefore my money owed him restitution. Every dollar he took, he had already privately reclassified as back pay. The divorce took 8 months. The prenup held, my company stayed mine. He asked to keep the card for 90 days during the transition, and Yvette said no in 11 words. 2 days after the decree, I called the bank. The woman on the phone said I could simply remove the authorized user. That was all that was required. I told her to close the account permanently. She paused, then said something I have repeated to myself more times than I can count. Required and already done are not always the same thing. When I hung up, I did not feel powerful. I felt tired, and about 4% lighter, which is not the same as happy. 7 weeks later, the engagement photo went up. The fountain court at the Ellsworth, her hand on his lapel. The invitation came in March. Inside was a note in Delia's handwriting. Closure requires grace. I hope you can celebrate a happiness all 3 of us deserve. 9 days before the wedding, my inbox did something I did not expect. An automated billing confirmation from the Ellsworth, addressed to me. Because Grant had not opened a new account for his wedding. He had reused the old corporate event profile, the one that carried our negotiated rate, 22% off room blocks, 2 complimentary hours of the ballroom. He did not forget to remove me as billing contact. He looked at it and decided the discount was worth the risk, because he was certain I would never open the email. The confirmation said the remaining $95,200 would be charged to the card, ending 4402, following the cake cutting, and underneath it, the deposit history, the grand ballroom at the Ellsworth Books, 14 months out. The engagement photo was taken 7 weeks before the wedding. They did not get engaged and then find a venue. They had been paying for that room for the better part of a year, and then staged a proposal at the fountain of a building they had already put money down on, so the pictures would come out in the right order. I did not stay silent. I want that on the record, because of what he said later. At 9:14 on Thursday morning, I wrote back, "To billing, I am not a party to this event contract and have no authority over it. The account referenced was permanently closed in March. It will not process a transaction. Saturday night or any other night, please contact Mr. Marchetti directly, Sloane Hargrove." The hotel forwarded it to him at 9:41 that same morning. Then I opened the deposit history again and did the only thing I actually know how to do. 4 payments to the Ellsworth, $40,000, $24,800, $25,000, $24,000, $113,800, drawn from an account holding my money, coded as client retention. I paid for that ballroom. I paid for the roses. I paid for the band. I paid for the stage they were going to stand on and retell our history from. Yvette asked me, carefully, whether I was going. I'm not going to their wedding, I said. I'm going to look at what I paid for. She did not talk me out of it. She gave me rules instead. No confrontation, no documents, no accusations. My own car. Leave the moment it stops feeling safe. And one more, which she made me repeat back to her. Do not confuse witnessing a consequence with causing one. If you have gotten this far and you think I should have burned that invitation, type, don't go. If you think I had every right to sit in a room I had paid for, type table 38. I read every one of them, and subscribe, because the rest of that night went the way nobody in the building expected, including me. Delia came to my office 4 days before the wedding, carrying a box, books, a jacket I had left at her apartment, a ceramic dish from a trip we took to Santa Fe in our 20s. And the spare key to my house, the one I'd had cut for her the winter her heat went out. She set it on my desk without comment, the way you return something that was always only borrowed. Then she said the thing she had actually come to say. You could have signed it. He would have been fine. You chose to let him fail. I asked her if she understood that the guarantee was $2.1 million of my own money. That's what a partner does, she said. And there it was, in her arithmetic. Refusing to risk everything I had built was not caution. It was sabotage. The harm in the story was mine. At the door, she turned around, and she was smiling when she said it. The wedding is already paid for, Sloane. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said. 2 days before the ceremony, Terrence called. The lender's review had found the discrepancies. They had frozen the Foundry Row draw, pending a sworn reconciliation. No new money. Effective immediately. Grant knew that on Thursday, he got married on Saturday. For a long time, I could not understand why. And then I saw the seating chart, and 2 names on it explained the entire thing. Both of the Foundry Row equity investors were on the guest list. He could not cancel. Canceling a 280-person wedding 9 days out, in front of the 2 men deciding whether to keep him alive, would have announced the collapse before the lender ever did. So the wedding stopped being a wedding. It became a performance of solvency. 1,200 roses as a financial statement. My mother put it more simply. I was in her kitchen the night before, not eating a plate of food she had made anyway. Your problem was never that you were weak, Joe said. Your problem is that you can endure almost anything, and you have spent your whole life calling that endurance love. I arrived at the Ellsworth at 6:15. The escort card said Sloane Hargrove, table 38, last table in the room, beside the service door, in the same corner as the tables where the photographers and the band would eat. They wanted me visible enough to be noticed and far enough away not to be in the photographs. There was one other person seated at 38 when I got there. Winifred Marchetti, 84, Grant's great-aunt, in a navy dress and pearls, already halfway through a glass of white wine. I found out later she had been moved there after the engagement party, where she had asked Delia, pleasantly, at volume, exactly when the 2 of them had met. We had been seated together for the same reason. At 8, they dimmed the lights and played a film. It ran 4 minutes, photographs, music, a montage of 2 people who had apparently found each other after great sorrow. There was one of them on a boat, laughing, taken on a Saturday. I remembered clearly because Grant had told me he was meeting a contractor in Sedalia, And there was one where Delia was wearing a wool scarf. I had given her that scarf for Christmas. The date stamp in the corner of the frame put it 5 months before the night I first saw a message on that tablet. Winnie watched me watch it. She did not say anything, which I appreciated more than anything anyone said to me that year. The film ended. The lights came up, and a few minutes later, while the room was still applauding, Ruth Marchetti crossed the floor to table 38. Grant's mother, 73 years old, in a gray dress she'd worn to my wedding too. She did not sit down. She put a small velvet box on the tablecloth in front of me and kept one hand on it for a moment. Inside was Grant's grandmother's wedding ring, the one I wore for 7 years, the one I put in an envelope and gave back to my attorney in October. Ruth did not apologize. She did not mention Delia. She did not explain how she had it or why she had brought it to her son's wedding. She said 3 words. I kept it. Then she went back to her table and sat down beside her husband and folded her napkin across her lap. Grant came to table 38 at 8:40, with a photographer trailing him. He put both hands on the back of the empty chair beside me, gripped it hard enough that his knuckles changed color, and smiled the whole time. It would help everyone, he said, if they understood that our marriage was emotionally over before Delia and I began. And that was when I finally understood why I was in the room. They had not invited me to hurt me. That was a bonus. They invited me because a photograph of the ex-wife sitting calmly at the back of the ballroom, saying nothing, is a document. It certifies their version. I was not a guest. I was a signature. The speeches started at 9. The best man used the word brave twice. Delia's cousin said authentic. Somebody talked about the courage it takes to stop living a life that isn't yours. Then Grant raised his glass, and he looked at the back of the room when he said it. You can't build a future while you're still apologizing for leaving the past. 280 people applauded. I did not. Winnie set her wine down very slowly, at 9:20. A woman I had known for 9 years knelt beside my chair, Naomi Fisk. She had a coat over her arm already. I saw them, she said, last winter, at the plaza, in December, and I decided I'd misread it, because if I hadn't misread it, I was going to have to do something. I told her I understood. I meant it, which surprised me. That's the part I keep thinking about, she said. It was never that I didn't know. It was that knowing was going to cost me a friendship, and I picked the cheaper one. At 9:41, they cut the cake. 7 tears, a knife, a photograph, and underneath the applause, the small flat electronic sound of a card terminal at the service station behind me. You already know what happened next. The quiet sentence, the loud answer, the second attempt, 280 faces turning toward the last table in the room. What you don't know is what he said after I told him no the first time. He leaned in closer. He lowered his voice into the register. Men use when they think it sounds reasonable. Just pay it tonight. I'll wire it back to you Monday. No. Sloane, you can afford it. And I heard, in that sentence, the entire architecture of 12 years. My ability to pay, I said, has nothing to do with your entitlement to it. He straightened up. Something behind his face gave way. And what came out was not the reasonable voice anymore. You could have warned me. I did not argue with him. I have argued with that man for a decade and never once won by arguing. I took out my phone. I found the email. I turned the screen around and held it up so he could read it. I did warn you. In writing, 9:14 on Thursday morning. The hotel forwarded it to you at 9:41. He looked at the date. You had 9 days, I said. You spent all 9 of them deciding I would fold. Then he did the thing that ended it, though nobody in the room realized it yet. He turned around and went looking for someone else to pay. He found Delia's parents first, Wendell and Corinne Brandt, Table 3, retired school teachers from Independence. Dressed in the good clothes, I heard most of it, because he had stopped bothering to be quiet. He wanted them to draw on their home equity line. Tonight, Wendell Brandt was a high school principal for 31 years. He did not raise his voice either. A home equity line is not a wallet. Grant, I file a draw request. The bank opens Monday. He set down his napkin, and if I could pull it tonight, the answer would still be no. An emergency is something nobody saw coming. This is an unpaid bill. Then he said the number out loud, $95,200. And I watched a retired principal do arithmetic in front of 280 people. The hotel already has $151,800, he said slowly. We gave 38. He looked around the ballroom, the roses, the champagne tower, the stage. Then he turned to table 38 and looked directly at me. So the rest of it is yours? Not a question. Yes, Wendell Brandt nodded once, very slightly, and then he did the thing nobody else in that room did all night. I'm sorry, he said. He went to his father next. Sal Marchetti had not moved from table 1 all night. He listened for about 40 seconds before he answered. The lender's attorney called me Tuesday, Sal said. Do you want to tell me why my trust is listed as additional collateral on a project I have never been asked about? Grant said something about temporary structuring. You're going to embarrass me in front of everybody, he said. His father looked at him for a long moment. You don't need my help for that. Then Grant called his CFO and put her on speaker, on purpose, in the middle of the floor, because he wanted the room to hear his company solve this. June Alcantara answered on the second ring. He asked her to authorize the corporate card. He said it was a client development expense. Grant, she said, and her voice came out of that phone across half the ballroom. That card is inside the lender's review scope. Every transaction on it is being copied to their auditors this week. You are asking me to book a $95,000 wedding as a business expense in the same week they've demanded a sworn reconciliation. June, I would have to certify it. I'm not going to certify it. That was the third time that word crossed the ballroom, from a third person, and Grant had not seen any of them coming. At 10 o'clock, Raphael Sandoval did exactly what he said he would do at 9:41. The premium bar closed. The kitchen stood down the late-night service. Sunday's brunch was released. The band was told they would finish at 10:15. Nothing broke. Nobody shouted. There was no scene. The party simply got smaller, in orderly steps, the way a building gets condemned floor by floor. And then the phones started. 26 guest rooms had been booked under the event's master account. At 10:05, the front desk began calling them, one at a time. So, sorry to disturb you, the master account for this evening's event is no longer active. Could you provide a personal card to hold the room tonight? I watched it move through the ballroom. A phone lighting at table 9, then table 4, then 2 at once near the dance floor, Grant's cousins, his college roommate, an equity investor in a gray suit who stood, read his screen, and walked out without saying goodbye. That was the part that could not be contained. The humiliation left the room. Delia found me at 10:20, still in the dress. Are you happy? She said. Look at what you did to my wedding. You invited me to watch you celebrate an affair, I said. You planned to charge that celebration to my account. Which part of this humiliation belongs to me? He left you because you controlled everything. Grant didn't leave me. I stood up. He stayed until he was sure the next loan was secured. I filed. Grant reached us before she could answer. He was not angry anymore. That was somehow worse. My parents' room, he said. Just their room. They're 73 years old. You're being cruel. I want to be honest. For about 2 seconds, I almost reached for my purse. 12 years of training does not switch off. You want to know what I did? I said instead. 340 pages of lease agreements I read for you. 11 proposals I rewrote after midnight. 9 clients I handed you. 2 flights to Columbus to save a project you promised without reading the terms. 4 years of answering your controller's calls on Sundays. He was staring at me. Nobody in this room ever saw any of it, including you. And then I said the truest thing I have ever said to him. You are feeling the absence of my labor, Grant, and you are calling it cruelty. I picked up my bag. Winnie Marchetti stood up at the same time I did, 84 years old, and she picked up both of our coats. We walked out together. At the doors, she stopped and handed me mine. I have been sitting in rooms like this since 1962, she said. I have watched a great many women leave rooms like this. She put her hand briefly on my arm. You're the first one I've seen walk out without apologizing to anybody. Behind us, the band began its last song, and I recognized it in the first 2 bars, because it was the song Grant and I had danced to at our own wedding. I made it to the parking garage before my hands started shaking. I got to my mother's house a little after 11. She had tomato soup on the stove and half a grilled cheese cut on the diagonal, because that is what she has made me since 1990. She did not ask whether Delia cried. She asked if I wanted the overhead light on, and whether my feet hurt. I said I thought I would feel strong. Jo put down the ladle. She sat across from me and said something she had never once said in my hearing. You learned that from me. I looked up. I waited 31 years for Ireland. Your father was sick for the last 9 of them. But the 22 years before that, there was no reason. Every year there was just something more important than what I wanted. Her hands were flat on the table. I called it sacrifice. And I let you watch me call it that, at this table, for 30 years. You did not invent that way of loving somebody. Sloane, you saw it here. 2 weeks later, Yvette put a page in front of me. The hotel had produced its file. Halfway down was a contact note dated the Wednesday before the wedding. Card authorization failed. Spoke with Mr. Marchetti, 4:12 p.m. He states his ex-wife still holds the account and will resolve it at the event. I read it twice. He had not been ambushed. He had known for 3 days. The invitation was not arrogance. It was an invoice. He brought me there so that I could not say no in front of 280 people. I had calculated everything correctly except one thing. He was still using a version of me from 5 years ago. June Alcantara resigned that Monday and gave the lender everything she had preserved. The Foundry Row draw was never released. The independent review closed at $374,000. 6 months later, Grant signed an acknowledgement that I had never approved the documents bearing my name. Here is what I want you to understand about that night, though. Nobody in that ballroom punished him. 5 different people simply stopped doing the thing they had always done. A hotel manager, a father, a school teacher, a chief financial officer, and me. That turns out to be what brings a man like him down, not an attack. The absence of hands that had been holding him up. I went to therapy. I took a pottery class. And my first bowl came out looking like a hat that had lost an argument. My firm won the largest contract in its history. an abandoned high school converted into affordable housing, a child care center, and a library. I hired June Alcantara as my CFO. The first thing we built together was a 2-signature approval threshold. 16 years after I deleted a spreadsheet to prove that I trusted someone, I wrote the control back into the wall. Their marriage lasted 14 months. Somebody sent me the notice. I deleted it without opening it, because their ending was never going to be my reward. In June, I took my mother to Dingle. We rode a coast road in County Kerry where her grandmother was born, and she held my hand on the bus and laughed like a child. At dinner, she tasted the soup and told me, with real disappointment, that it was not as good as hers. That trip was not a gift I gave her. It was 2 women ending a family habit together. There was one more call. I read the first line. "Sloane, it's Grant. I know I don't have the right to ask, but..." I stopped there. In my experience, "I don't have the right to ask" is always followed by a request. I blocked the number. The old brass key is not on my keyring anymore. The crooked bowl sits by my door, and it holds the keys to an apartment that only I have ever paid for. I inspect buildings for a living, and here is the only thing I actually know. A load-bearing wall never fails from a single impact. It fails because it carried too much for too long, and nobody ever came to check it. If you are the load-bearing wall in your family, your marriage, a friendship of 15 years, leave a comment. I read every one. And tell me honestly, do you think I should have gone to that wedding at all? If this reached you, subscribe. Every week, I tell the story of a woman who finally set the weight down. Thank you for staying to the end.